Hey guys, how you doing? It's Tom. Sometimes I wonder how people watch TV and not realize just how incredibly interesting the real world is. This story is not surprising, but it really is amazing that this just keeps happening time and time again. So let's just get right into it. A couple of months back, if you were paying attention to the news, which I know my followers were, Peter Strzok, FBI agent, high-ranking FBI agent, and one of the people on the team that were supposed to be investigating Hillary Clinton, had an affair with Lisa Page, a lawyer who would also wind up on the team investigating Trump for Russian collusion, as was Peter Strzok. They had an affair, and they got outed as being extremely biased and anti-Trump. I don't have to get too much into it, but all type of disparaging text message about Trump, about the Trump campaign. And they even said that, don't worry, Peter Strzok said, don't worry if Trump wins, that they had an insurance policy. Now, the assumption would be that that insurance policy was the seemingly made-up Russian narrative, given that there's been virtually no evidence. I mean, Flynn, Manafort, Flynn, they got on a process crime, which is basically, if the FBI goes to talk to you, right? And they're going to ask you all these questions. They ask you the first time. And then they'll come back a second time and they'll ask you the same questions. And the third time, and they'll ask you the same questions. And the fourth time, and they'll ask you the same questions. And if your story changes the slightest bit, not because you're lying, but because you're telling the same story multiple times, the slightest bit, they can get you on perjury, lying to the FBI. So that's what they got Michael Flynn on, a slight deviation in the same story that he told time and time again. This is why when you see people testify in front of Congress in congressional hearings, they'll tell their story one time, and then if they're asked the same question again, they say, I'll refer you back to my previous statement. But Flynn wasn't made fully aware that he was being investigated, and he didn't have a lawyer present. He was just speaking off the cuff, answering questions honestly. That's how they got him. And Paul Manafort, they got him for, allegedly, for his activities in the Ukraine, because most of the American public just sees Eastern Europe and they can't distinguish anything from anything. But overall, the whole Russia narrative has been, in the words of CNN, when they were caught by Project Veritas in undercover video, a big nothing burger. So now we have Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. And the story broke, I believe yesterday, could have been 2 days ago, that 50,000 text messages sent between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, two important FBI agents in charge of, that were part of the Hillary Clinton email investigation and the Russian collusion, Trump-Russia narrative investigation. 50,000 text messages between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok are reported to be lost or accidentally deleted. I mean, this is amazing stuff. This is amazing stuff. One congressman who did have access to intelligence sources said that among the text messages that were deleted, there were talk of a secret society. We'll get back to that in a minute because many people aren't aware of the history of secret societies and how small groups of people get together in cabals to really shape society to the world that you see today. But before we get into that, how often are we going to see lie after lie after lie? Because we saw the IRS targeting scandal, right? The Obama administration used the IRS as a political weapon to target conservative political groups. So if you speak up, if you had pro-conservative messaging or pro-conservative messages during the Obama administration, you might get a call from the IRS, you might get an audit, they'll make your life a living hell because no one could do that like the IRS. And Lois Lerner, who was in charge during the Obama years, she had to testify under oath. Of course, she didn't say anything, she just took the fifth. And it turned out that she had deleted emails. Then, of course, we have Hillary Clinton. She had a private server, which in on its own was illegal. And of course, the reason she had the private server is because if no one knew about the server, future Freedom of Information Act requests that come up wouldn't include a server that didn't theoretically exist. So Hillary Clinton set up a private server to avoid future Freedom of Information requests. But of course, that server was outed. People found out that she had the server. And what did she do? She deleted 33,000 emails. She didn't just delete them. She used a special software called BleachBit, which again, in itself, the server in itself was legal. The deleting of the emails is illegal, especially when you're using BleachBit, because it's so deliberate that she is going out of her way to hide whatever it is that Hillary Clinton does. I mean, can you imagine how many illegal things this lady actually has done in her life? It really is remarkable. So you have Lois Lerner, you have Hillary Clinton, you have Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and the Awan brothers, which I have done a detailed report on. If you're not familiar with the Awan brothers, I don't want to get into it right now. Go to my videos, just scroll down. You'll see a video on the Awan brothers. I actually think it is the most viewed video I've ever done. It goes through the court documents and just how corrupt. I mean, basically they were running a spy/blackmail ring right out of Congress. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz was eerily close to it. So anyway, they smashed a hard drive. And then we have the on videotape, which I've also done a report on, tape of Debbie Wasserman Schultz lambasting, threatening a Washington police chief who had confiscated one of her laptops to give back the laptop. Who knows what's on that? We'll see if anything comes of it. You really lose faith in justice because the American justice system seems to cast out a very, 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 very strange net. And they cast it out, the net of American justice. And what happens is this net catches all the small fish. If you're a low-level guy, if you're a nobody, they get you and they parade you out in front of the public and say, "We got this guy. Look, we're doing our job." But at the same time, that little fish gets caught, all the big fish swimming directly next to that little fish seem to swim right through the net. They don't get caught. It's amazing. So it's the American net of American justice. So Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she tried to get her computer back. And these are all just remarkable examples of obstruction of justice, yet no one seems to ever be held accountable. And then, of course, we have the non-stop lying under oath. Remember, we had Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. He was asked point blank in a congressional hearing under oath, does the NSA spy on Americans? And does the NSA collect and store the phone conversations of Americans? And he said point blank, no. All right. Well, you would think once Edward Snowden outed the NSA as using blanket collection techniques to collect the phone conversations and the transcripts of seemingly every person in America, after that got discovered, at the very least, the Director of National Intelligence, who was caught lying under oath, would be held accountable, right? I mean, if me or you lied under oath, what do you think would happen? We'd go to jail. We've seen Army privates lie under oath, and they go to jail. But someone like James Clapper, someone like Hillary Clinton, someone like Huma Abedin or Deborah Wasserman Schultz, they're above the law. Because America, for at least in my lifetime, has been a banana republic where there is one class of people who are above the law, and then there's the rest of us who have to adhere to the laws that they put on us. So we have all this amazing corruption. Now let's put that in the context of they had spoken about a secret society, Lisa Page and Peter Strzok in their text messages. At least this is reported. Now, we don't know if, I'm not saying that this means, oh, it's the Illuminati or something like that. You could look into that on your own, but what are they referring to with a secret society? Are there elements within the government who had put forth a plan, an insurance policy, to try to have Trump removed from office should he be elected, and that secret society had to go into effect. Now, let's do a little history lesson, because you don't get taught this stuff in school, and people don't really, you don't really see anyone talk about it in general. If you read Tragedy and Hope by Professor Carroll Quigley, one of the most respected professors in America in his day, he wrote this book, Tragedy and Hope, which is one of the most extensive historical books about the history of Western civilization you could ever read. It's a nauseating read. It's really boring. It's extremely detailed, because he doesn't just go through the history in the book. What he does is he talks about the history and the people behind the scenes. So he'll say, and this is where the funding was coming from, and this is where this idea originated at so-and-so conference. So he really gets into it, and he talks a lot about bankers. He talks a lot about J.P. Morgan and these type of people and how they operated behind the scenes. And he was actually brought in to be, he was actually brought in to be an historian for these bankers to document what they did behind the scenes. Narcissism knows no bounds, and although they are the wolf in sheep's clothing, they certainly wanted a record of what they had done. But they didn't expect this record to go viral. But people started to read his book, and before you know it, his book was gaining a lot of steam. So Tragedy and Hope was actually removed from the market, and Carroll Quigley sued the publishing company, which I believe had been purchased by J.P. Morgan, to stop the publishing of his book, and he won, and now the book is once again disseminated. And if you want that book, it's available free online. Just make sure you Google it. There are two versions. The publishing company published a Fox version where they took out certain information. So anyway, this book, Tragedy and Hope, and in it, Carroll Quigley outlines something that took place in the late 1800s. And bear with me here. There was this guy, John Cecil Rhodes. You might think you've never heard of him, but he actually started the De Beer Diamond Company. And by the late 1800s, he had a monopoly over the world's diamond supply. So he's very, very rich. I mean, imagine owning all the diamonds in the world. Rich beyond your wildest dreams. And he had attended Oxford. And when he was at Oxford, he had a professor, John Ruskin. And Ruskin taught that British culture was the greatest culture the world had ever known. And that they had a duty, a obligation, possibly from God, to spread British culture throughout the world. So John Cecil Rhodes, with all his money and power, thought this was a great idea. So he started a secret society known as the Society of the Elect. I mentioned the wolf in sheep's clothing. Their logo is actually literally a wolf in sheep's clothing. And their ideology is Fabian socialism. There was an old Roman general, Fabius, who attacked through a war of attrition. So rather than getting out on the campaign trail and saying, we need socialism, it's about subversion, subtle tactics. I did my report on feminism the other day. A lot of that is of that culture, feminist culture that pushes from the top, derives from cultural Marxism, which is the spread of collectivism under the guise of equality of outcome rather than true freedom, individual liberty, which is equality of opportunity. We don't all have to end up in the same place, but we should have the same freedoms, because if one group of people have different freedoms than another, that's not liberty, that's the antithesis of liberty. So everything's so backwards. But anyway, getting back to the Society of the Elect. So he's John Cecil Rhodes starts the Society of the Elect, and if you want to know more about this, read Tragedy and Hope. And you always hear about the Rothschild bankers, but people don't actually know the history. So he gets the Rothschild bankers involved, a couple of very rich and powerful people. And they make offshoot groups that are non-governmental groups, but are designed to infiltrate governments. So in Britain, this is where the Institute of International Affairs was created. And this is the cousin group to the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States of America, and they have these groups in countries all over the world. South Africa, they had them everywhere. They have Canada, but in America, it's the Council on Foreign Relations. And they used, John Cecil Rhodes used the Rothschilds' banking connections to connect with J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, not the institution, the man. J.P. Morgan was at one time the richest man in the world, going back and forth versus Rockefellers, John Cecil Rhodes, and a group of very small, powerful people. So J.P. Morgan, generously, through his philanthropy, donated funding to the Council on Foreign Relations, and him and a group of small bankers gained control of the Council on Foreign Relations. They quickly brought in John D. Rockefeller, who, up until the time of his death, which was this year, or his son, so both of them, but his son died this year, was actually the honorary chair of the Council on Foreign Relations. And if you research the Council on Foreign Relations, the head of the CIA, the head of the FBI, the heads of the Department of State are overwhelmingly come through the Council on Foreign Relations. These people are the kingmakers. So you go to the Council on Foreign Relations, if they like you, they get you in contact with the powerful donors. The powerful donors back political campaigns, whether it's for your campaign or they back someone's campaign and then say, I want my person who's come through the Council on Foreign Relations to be the Secretary of State. I want my person who's come through the Council on Foreign Relations to be the head of the CIA, the head of the FBI. So secret societies very much affect society historically, and they still do to this day. So I just wanted to put that in context. If someone says, ooh, a secret society, they don't know what they're talking about because most people don't understand history. But the history is all out there, and the influence that secret societies have had on American history, let alone world history, and that's just American history is very short, is really, it's undeniable. So now tying this all together. So you have these secret societies, and they put their people in charge of the CIA and the NSA and the FBI and the Secretary of State. And then we see, time after time, that these intelligence agencies, they lie to us, they subvert the Constitution, they spy on us illegally, they destroy evidence, and no one is held accountable. No one is ever held accountable for this. So my real question to you is, what I want you to think about is, with this whole Russia narrative, whether you buy into it or not, remember, they also lied about weapons of mass destruction. They got us into wars. They lied about the Gulf of Tonkin to escalate Vietnam. This is all well documented. Look it up. Trust your eyes. Trust your ears. Get back to the primary documents. Don't take my word for it. Stop outsourcing your thinking to authority because you are smart. You're brilliant. You have to trust yourself. Just because someone has been branded authority doesn't mean they know better than you. That's the problem in our society. People don't know, they don't realize what they're capable of. So these agencies, which are largely controlled through secret societies, and who knows what Strzok was talking about, whether this is something new, a secret cabal, or whether it's part of an old guard. But all these people, the CIA, FBI, no one's held accountable. Is the real problem that we don't have the right people in these positions of power? Or is the real threat to our freedom, the real threat to our liberty, to our constitutional republic, the fact that we allow these outside of law agencies to exist in the first place? John F. Kennedy said, at least it was reported by the New York Times shortly after his death, said that if it were up to him, he would splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and shatter the ashes into the wind. Would you? Thanks, guys. Subscribe and share. And if you want to support my grassroots media, go to www.patreon.com/FFRnews.